Everton is just one of 6 clubs that have never been relegated since the Premier League began in 1992. The last time they dropped down from the top division was way back in 1954. As a founding member of the Football League in 1888, Everton is also one of the oldest clubs in England. Even though their old victories are forgotten today, they remain one of the most successful clubs in England with 9 league titles, 5 FA Cups and a European Cup Winners' Cup. Their most recent achievement is the 1995 FA Cup trophy, so it's safe to say that a traditional powerhouse like Everton has struggled to maintain its stature over the past 3 decades. Everton's decline has been especially steep over the past decade, possibly starting after David Moyes left in 2013. Moyes had led the club for over 10 years before moving to Manchester United, and since then, Everton's managers haven't quite brought the club back to its former level. Everton has failed to keep up with the modern demands of the game and struggled in a lot of key areas to develop. Apart from the instability due to managerial changes, poor recruitment has also contributed to a fair share of problems as well. The recent points deduction and financial mismanagement have left the club struggling to stay up in the last few years. The mid-table club vying for European places has turned into a relegation-threatened club with no signs of sustainable growth year after year. This seems like a bad time to buy a stake in Everton, who are clearly on a downward spiral. So why has the Friedkin Group agreed to take over the club? The answer is because of its loyal and passionate fans. The Evertonians have suffered over the years, witnessing their club diminish in stature and often be the butt of mid-table jokes. But they are a tight-knit community that backs their club through thick and thin. A foreign takeover might just be what they need to gradually make a comeback from relegation fears to at least mid-table comfort. However, these heavy transactions can often take a long time to move over the line. Let's take a look at what has gone wrong at Everton for the club to reach this point and whether the takeover will bring any change to the club's trajectory. David Moyes left Everton in 2013 after more than a decade with the club. Since then, a lot of managers have been appointed to turn their fortunes around, but none have truly succeeded. Roberto Martinez came in after Moyes and stayed for 3 seasons. He was replaced in the summer of 2016 by Ronald Koeman, but the famed Dutchman's stint was short-lived as he was replaced by Sam Allardyce in November 2017. Big Sam only stuck around to the end of the season, and Marco Silva took his place in the summer of 2018. The fans had grown wary of watching the insufferable football that Allardyce would put on display every other week. Even the favourable results weren't enough to convince the supporters to continue on the same path. Marco Silva's appointment was seen as the first move away from quick-fix management and instead working on a long-term project. He managed to build a new identity and a rebuild seemed to be underway. The first season ended in 8th place, which was only 3 points away from European qualification spots. The fans were happy due to the style of football being played and the teams playing for the badge. There was substantial backing in the transfer market again that summer. The first choice centre-back on loan, Kurt Zouma, couldn't be made permanent even after Marcos Silva and the director of football, Marcel Brands, tried. The manager then asked to sign Marcos Rojo from United on the final day of the summer window, but the director of football vetoed the deal. This left Everton with only 3 recognised first-team centre-backs for the season. Alex Iwobi and Moises Kean were brought in for considerable amounts, which made everyone question the Everton recruitment department. Subsequent injuries and misfiring signings dug a deep hole for Marco Silva. A growing trend of conceding from set pieces piled on the Portuguese manager's woes. In December 2019, he was sacked after a 5-2 thrashing at the hands of Liverpool. In came Carlo Ancelotti, which made the Evertonians hopeful of a brighter future. But his unexpected arrival was matched with an unexpected departure in June 2021 when Real Madrid came calling. Looking back at it, Don Carlo's tenure at Everton was one of the most random managerial appointments in football history. The various cycle of bad recruitment continued, with Rafa Benitez appointed as the next manager. This was met with widespread criticism and outrage by the Evertonians because of his deep involvement with their Merseyside rivals. But the board brought him in anyway and embarrassingly bid farewell just 6 months later after finding themselves in a relegation battle. Frank Lampard then managed the club for a year from January 2022 to 2023. He survived the relegation battle in 2022 only to be in the same spot come a year later. He managed to get an unprecedented win percentage of just below 28% throughout his tenure. The relegation survival expert himself, Sean Dyche's services were called upon and he has been managing the club ever since. But these constant managerial changes have created a lot of problems for the club. The most obvious one is bringing in players that go out of favour under new management. Since Farhad Moshiri took over half ownership of Everton in 2016, he has pumped in a fair amount of money. He even raised his stake from 49.9% in 2016 to 94% in 2022. He has contributed to the development of a new stadium and injected a lot of money into signing players. At surface level, he seems to be the perfect owner for a football club, but his decision-making related to football operations has been atrocious. The modern era has proved time and time again that money alone cannot guarantee success. Running a club is now more nuanced than throwing money at every problem. Moshiri has thrown plenty of money, but at the same time has lacked the patience with managers. The constant managerial changes led to different managers bringing in different players to fit their own tactics, with each new appointment throwing the player's future up in the air. Moshiri never catered for a long-term vision, and over time, this led to an inflated wage bill at the club, along with extravagant prices paid for average players. After Marco Silva was sacked, the most obvious Moshiri-backed appointment was made. He brought in Ancelotti on a 4.5-year deal to make Evertonians see a silver lining. The highly decorated manager set to work and finished 12th in his first season in charge. Moshiri backed Carlo in the summer as James Rodriguez, Alan, Decore and Ben Godfrey were brought in. The season started strong and Everton found themselves in the top 4 at Christmas. But the season ended in 10th place for the Blues, and further disappointment came when Carlo Ancelotti made the easiest decision of his life and went to Madrid. The Evertonians hadn't suffered enough though, and the next appointment of Benitez would certainly test the supporters. There were considerable protests and outrage, but the former Liverpool manager came in anyway. Without the backing of fans and a stagnant squad that had been compiled by numerous different managers, Moshiri sacked him in just 6 months. Lampard was fresh off the failure at his Chelsea role, and for some reason, the Everton board decided he would be a good fit for a relegation-threatened side. A dramatic 3-2 comeback against Palace at the end of that season kept Everton's top-flight sanctity intact. Moshiri backed Lampard for the next season, and the Evertonians were gaining a new sense of hope as well. But over the next few months, the disappointing string of results led to protests against the Everton board and Moshiri. Everton found themselves in 19th place, with Lampard having won a single game of the previous 11. Moshiri publicly backed the manager, but then sacked him after a few days in January 2023. Sean Dyche was handed the reins and managed to steer Everton away from relegation. He is still in charge and has deservedly earned the trust of fans at Goodison Park. Moshiri has invested in building a new stadium to replace Goodison Park in order to increase long-term revenue streams. But the lack of European football prize money, along with the losses incurring from various transfer deals, put Everton in a difficult financial position. In November 2023, the club was found guilty of breaching the profit sustainability rules and faced a 10-point deduction that season. By February, the deduction was reduced to 6 points after an appeal, until in April, 2 points were deducted again. On aggregate, 8 points were deducted from Everton in the 2023-24 season. Moyes had created positional stability in his decade-long tenure at the club, and ever since he left, only short-term appointments have come in and arguably let go of too early. Moshiri's reign will not be remembered with grace by the Evertonians, despite his attempts to throw money at all the problems. The Friedkin Group agreed to take over his 94% stake at the club, and many supporters will be relieved to see a change at the top. It has been evident that Everton has lacked direction over the past decade, and their management at the top level has been totally incompetent. New ownership is bound to bring in a fresh outlook and new hope for the fans. The club will need to be extremely cautious of not repeating the same mistakes they've made since the last takeover in 2016. There needs to be a systematic process in place to form a long-term vision for the club. Everton's rich history and former glory indicate that the club doesn't belong at the bottom of the barrel, but should be vying for competitive European places in the long term. It's easier said than done, so the new ownership will need to take a long, hard look at how the club has functioned over the past few years and overhaul its structure. The Friedkin Group, who also own AS Roma, are experienced with club operations, especially in terms of the importance of profitable spending in the transfer market. Evertonians will find it hard to contain their excitement after years of torture and relegation scares. The scares aren't necessarily over either, as they need to put a long-term plan in place and in the meantime, survive the relentless Premier League. Sean Dyche is probably best equipped to see them through until they are ready to take the next step. As long as the new owners don't get in over their heads and start making big changes without a vision, Everton fans should be safe from relegation this season. They don't have the best squad, but you'd think it's good enough for Sean Dyche. How long do you think the new owners will take to bring Everton back to competing for European spots in the league? Let us know in the comments below.